We all know some common history myths. No, George Washington didn't chop down that cherry tree. And no, he didn't have wooden teeth. President Taft didn't get stuck in the White House bathtub either. We hear our fair share of myths about the 19th century at the John Wornall and Alexander Majors houses too. Some that you may even believe to be true. So join us as we bust 5 common 19th century historical myths. Myth number 1. Old houses didn't have closets because closets were taxed. This is probably the most commonly repeated myth we hear on tours. For some reason, there are a lot of myths about taxes. In truth, there is no evidence of closet taxes in the United States. There are so few closets in old houses simply because they were not that useful to early Americans. Closets were used for general storage, and most people did not have that much extra stuff to store. Clothes hangers did not come into use until after the Civil War, so closets were not used for clothing. People used wardrobes or dressers. And some old homes do have plentiful closets. The Wornall house has 5. Myth number 2. People didn't smile in photographs because of the long exposure time required. Well, sort of. It is true that it's harder to hold a natural-looking smile than a relaxed face. But more importantly, there is a cultural reason for serious photographs. Photography and painted portraiture was serious business. For example, Mark Twain once wrote, "A photograph is a most important document, and there is nothing more damning to go down to posterity than a silly, foolish smile caught and fixed forever." But Victorians weren't humorless, and you can find pictures of Victorians smiling. Myth number 3. People made everything at home or by hand, especially on the frontier. Both the Majors and the Wornall families lived on what was the edge of the United States. Both of their houses were located in Missouri, and their properties bordered on Kansas territory, but the region was hardly some uncultured backwater. Most people had specialized professions, and a watchmaker or shopkeeper in the 19th century wouldn't necessarily know how to build a wagon or a chair any more than the average person would today. It is true that more things were handmade than today. Most women in this region would have sewn clothing for their family and sometimes for slaves or servants, for example. But consumerism was booming. A quick look into an issue of the 1858 Westport Border Star, published in Westport, Missouri, proves this. The second page of the December 31st issue alone has advertisements for groceries, tailoring, holiday portraits, watches, flavoring extracts, blacksmithing and wagon making, candy, medicine, cigars and tobacco, an oyster saloon, and much more. We also have many receipts of purchases made by the Wornall family. Some of these include goods as varied as a satin vest and a palm fan, books like British Spy, coffee, and a pie dish, stockings, washtub, and cookbook. Myth number 4. Everybody died young. The biggest problem with this myth is that statistics on average life expectancy are skewed by an extremely high infant and childhood mortality rate. A 2013 study of historical data of 43 historical cultures showed that, on average, 26.9% of newborns died in their first year of life, and 46.2% died before they reached adulthood in the years prior to the 20th century. The modern global infant mortality rate is 2.9%, with 4.6% dying before reaching the age of 15. Of course, modern medical advancements have helped to increase the average life expectancy, but it was not unusual for 19th century Americans to live into what we would consider old age. White men in 1850 who lived to be 20 could expect, on average, to live until the age of 60, while white women could live to an average of 67. John Wornall was 70 when he died, and Alexander Majors was 86. Myth number 5. People had separate kitchens because of fear of fire. Kitchens in southern areas of the United States, including Missouri, were often separated from the main house. But why? Kitchens were hot, smelly, smoky places. The heat in particular would be unwelcome to Southerners during hot months, which is the primary reason kitchens were removed from the house, simply to keep the house cooler. Another reason was the desire to segregate slaves or servants from the main living space. Fire was certainly a concern, but a kitchen was no more of a fire risk than the many other fire hazards in the average 19th century home. Fireplaces or stoves would be the heat source in most rooms of the house, and oil or gas burning lamps and candles would be the norm for lighting, all huge fire hazards. In fact, most large historic fires started in industrial or business areas rather than in homes. This includes the 1835 Great Fire of New York, which started in a warehouse, the Great New York Fire of 1845, which started in a whale oil and candle manufacturer, the St. Louis Fire of 1849, which started on a steamboat, and the 1866 Great Fire of Portland, Maine, which started in a boathouse, possibly by cigar or firework ash. A notable exception is the Great Fire of Pittsburgh in 1845, caused by a servant who left a newly stoked fire unattended as she heated washing water. So how many of these common misperceptions did you believe? Are there things you suspect are myths that you want us to investigate? Let us know.